Hello and welcome to the Buffalo Journal. I'm Lance Tailfeathers. On today's show, we will visit the headquarters of one of Canada's leading Native newspapers, the Kainai News. We have an interview with Boye Ladd, a well-known Native entertainer. And we go on the road with one of the veterans of the pow-wow trail. But first, the Sarcee Indian Reserve is a close neighbor of the city of Calgary. Rick Tailfeathers shows us how the economic benefits of this location are overshadowed by the decline of the Sarsi language and culture.
Industrial development in Western Canada has impacted all Canadians. It has brought social and economic change by leaps and bounds in the past 2 decades. Here in Calgary, the gem of the oil industry, the effects of such rapid change have been felt greatly by the native people of the nearby Sarcee Indian Reserve. Industrialization has taken its toll on the native language and culture, but the economic benefits have been many. The Sarcee, like many Indian tribes in Canada, are holding on to their old ways, but it isn't easy, especially with the urban lifestyle just a few short meters away. The roots of the Sarcee Nation go back many generations to the Athapascan tribes. Their dominance here on the Alberta plains has been felt for at least 300 years. In recent times, they have been allied with the Blackfoot Confederacy. In 1877, they signed Treaty No. 7, which granted them Aboriginal rights and a reserve along the Elbow River. It was not until the early 20th century, when the settlement by Europeans on their Aboriginal lands, that the effects of change were really felt. It brought a foreign way of life. Industrialization brought a new order, which meant adaptation to the white man's ways. It has taken a toll on the Sarcee culture and lifestyle.
Our own people have kind of lost their identity, where they've don't know if they're native or non-native just by skin color. Now they recognize themselves, and that I think without their identity being noticeable within themselves, they're not growing the way that they should be as a human being or as a native. The generations, say from the late 1950s, the children that were born during that time to now have virtually lost their language, and there's only about 86 speaking Sarcees now.
Today, the Sarcee are fighting to maintain their independence from Calgary. The ever-growing city limits are creeping up to the boundaries of their reserve, and the urban lifestyle beckons only a short distance away. It has had a profound social and economic impact. Here on the reserve, the Sarcee are experiencing an economic boom. As tribal councillor Peter Manywounds tells us, the global community is interested in what the Sarcee are doing, and tourism is big business.
People are interested in what Indian people are doing and what kind of services we can provide to them. And I think that we're looking at being much more organized in tourism, and we've got a tourist development association now started on the reserve. It's not operated or run by chief and council, it's operated by the small business people who are involved. We've got people who have fashion design companies, we've got Red Thunder Cultural Society, we've got people who are looking at operating gas stations, people who are operating campsites and campgrounds. We've got an operation actually running, which is a riding academy and stable. So they've all gotten together basically and said, we're providing these services, and here's a huge market, not only of the residents of the city of Calgary, but the people that come here to Calgary as, you know, as a tourist attraction, Japanese and West Germans and all people from all over the country or the world that are interested in what we can provide. And so our effort is to make sure that they know we're here, that we do have these things to provide, that there's opportunities for them to experience some of our culture and tradition and history.
The land is the foundation on which the Sarcee Indian Nation is built. Now, as it was over 100 years ago, when the treaty was signed, the land is coveted by developers and the government. Recently, the Department of Defense and the Sarcees locked horns in a controversial land dispute. The Army has been using the Sarcee Reserve for war exercises for many years, often using live ammo. The Sarcees are worried some of those explosives are still on their land and pose a serious threat to future users.
The Department of National Defense is one of the major employers within the city of Calgary, and of course we're very close neighbors. So the relationship is sort of not just between us and the Army or D&D, it's between us and the Army and the city. And I think it's in everybody's interest that relationship continue on a good basis. We had some disputes, as everyone is aware, this June. We put a blockade on the bridge, and it was specifically with regard to the clearance of the land that they've leased since 1911 and have used for firing exercise and that kind of thing, and how the land was to be cleaned up. And we've gone through a process of negotiation. We received tremendous support from Indian people and leadership all across Canada, and particularly in southern Alberta. And we believe we reached a point where the Army is prepared to do what we feel they have to do to clear the land.
Today, the Sarcee are relatively well off compared to other Indian reserves in Western Canada. They have learned to play the white man's game and have benefited by the economic opportunities of being neighbors with the city of Calgary. But many think the urban lifestyle is destroying the Sarcee culture. Coming up next on the Buffalo Journal, following the Drumbeats.
For many Native people, following the pow-wow trail has become a popular summertime activity. For some, it is the occasional visit to a nearby reservation to see friends and relatives. But for Pat Kennedy and his drum group, it's much more than that. It's a way of life. Few people know the pow-wow lifestyle the way Pat Kennedy does. He's a well-known drummer who usually sings with the Star School Drummers from the Blackfeet Reservation in Browning, Montana. He's been at it for 35 years and still loving it. Rick Tailfeathers spoke to him at a recent powwow.
My folks, my dad and my uncles, they were singers, and I was just a little tiny guy. I used to sing with my dad and people, singers from Rocky Boy, and that's the way I started. So there was no powwow them days. There were just local people get together and they have little dance, not too many people.
How do you get around from powwow to powwow? Do you get paid for drumming?
Yeah, we make money, but lately we're just going to powwow. Before we worked, so we had to travel Sunday night to make it to work, and then Friday after we take off on our own expense. But what the money we get, some places we take first place, maybe $1,500. Some places we're host drum for $1,600. So we have enough to go to next powwow.
Since powwow celebrations became popular in the late 40s, many drum groups have come and gone. But the group Pat Kennedy sings with has a lot of staying power, more than 20 years of it.
How long are you going to be together? How long are you going to be on the powwow trail?
Oh, God knows. I don't know how long I'm going to be. Whenever our Creator won't let me stay here, I guess we'll be together. Because As long as I can be able to sing, I'm going to go on.
It's in Lake, stand by to bring in the Flags Retreat song. It's in Lake.
In today's high-tech world of media, events happening around the world are seen and heard through television and newspapers almost the moment they happen. News is serious business. It is pretty serious in the Native society as well. It helps in the social and economic development of the community and promotes positive growth, but few newspapers cover Native events. On the Blood Indian Reserve in southern Alberta, the Kainai News does cover the Native news and has been for nearly 22 years. In spite of tough economic conditions, it has flourished and grown to be one of Canada's top Native weekly newspapers. The Buffalo Journal took a trip to the Kainai News headquarters west of Cardston. It was interesting and very educational. The editor of the newspaper told us that Native news is important.
The newspaper is important because it covers a lot of events that the mainstream media does not cover, and it's been in existence now for 22 years. So it has proven that there is a need for a Native paper, and the viability of a newspaper has also been proven also because newspapers make their money through advertising and circulation, and there's no one tapping into the resources of the Native communities. So I think it's important that way, and then we also provide them with news and coverage on events.
The Kainai News has become very popular and read not only locally but worldwide. It covers the events that people want to read about. It takes a unique Indian perspective on the news.
We cover events that the mainstream media doesn't cover. For example, Indian Days, they'll have maybe one photo, but they won't get into the real spirit of the Indian Days, or like sports events, they don't cover like Native sports very much.
The Kainai News has a certain personality about it. The sports coverage in the newspaper is rated as #1 in Canada. It's through the efforts of photographer and sports editor Jim Goodstriker that the Indian sports has taken such a high profile in the media. He's a veteran of 22 years.
If you look at most major Indian newspapers, there's hardly any sports coverage. And the Kainai News throughout the years, I think, has been one of the unique papers that has covered sports. And when I got on as a sports writer, I went out to really try and establish a good sports coverage in all phases, whether it be basketball, rodeo, or to try and bring out to the public what the Indian athletes were doing.
18th?
No,
Next Thursday,
25th.
Dental.
On the 25th, you'll go. Okay.
Each week, the reporters are on the road following news stories. Yesterday was an interview with the local chief. Today, it will be coverage on a different event. But wherever the news happens, Kainai News is there. We followed reporter Ron Goodstriker on the beat.
Sometimes it does get, you can get stressed out if you have a lot of stories to do, especially on deadline day. But you have to keep a sense of humor as to what you're doing. You can't let deadlines get to you. You got a good sense of humor is good. You get to meet a lot of interesting people. You get to travel a lot. It's something new every day. It's not not mundane. You don't do the same things every day. There's always something new to do, new people to meet. That's what keeps it interesting.
Ever since the first edition of the Kainai News came off the press back in 1968, the newspaper has become an important item in most native homes in southern Alberta. It has played a key role in the development of good communications between the native community and the rest of the world. Next on the Buffalo Journal, the Birdman of Winnebago.
Boye Ladd is an Indian entertainer with a unique show. A broad and colorful background has molded him into one of the most interesting artists in Indian country. His show, which includes hoop dancing, animal imitations, and bird calls, has brought him a certain amount of recognition in the past 10 years. But his history as a native performer goes back to his childhood on the Winnebago Indian Reservation in Wisconsin. Being raised by his grandparents and cultured in the old Winnebago ways has been the source of his inspiration as a native performing artist. The Buffalo Journal followed him to a recent performing engagement.
Well, I've been performing now for close to 37, 38 years now. Since I was about 4 years old, I've been dancing and been in the entertainment world, Indian entertainment world, since about 1955, 1956. And I've been traveling quite extensively, doing performances, not only just in war dance, but doing these bird calls, hoop dancing, flute, eagle dance. I've pretty much got about a 2-hour show in total that I do. I do performances at sports shows during the winter, schools, universities.
In native folklore, the animal kingdom was not that distant from the human kingdom. His imitation of the whippoorwill was one of the bird calls he did.
The story was related to me that when I was born, I guess I was born with difficulty in breathing. I was a blue baby. And so they took me to this medicine man, and he'd worked on me and saw a vision that one day I would be able to speak with many of the birds, many of the animals. It wasn't until then, that I was about 7 years old, that they related this and to me. My grandfather used to get me up before daylight and go out and listen, watch the birds, watch the animals. At first I didn't really know what was in store. It took me years to understand, but eventually, after working with a chief evergreen tree from Cochiti village, New Mexico, he helped me in, I guess, in more or less solidifying the background behind, I guess, what I was brought up to be.
His imitation of dogs was excellent. This is what Boye Ladd calls the dogfight in an Indian village. The hoop dance has been done by many native dancers, but few have been doing it as long as Boye Ladd. The hoops are a dancer's impressions of the movements of nature.
On our last show, the Buffalo Journal's trivia question was, in 1912, a famous Indian won a very important event at the first Calgary Stampede. Who was that Indian, and what did he win? Tom Three Persons became the world champion saddle bronc rider at the 1912 Calgary Stampede. The bronc he rode a Cyclone, a horse from Wyoming which had never been ridden. This was the first of a string of championships to be won by Three Persons in his lifetime. Today's trivia question is this: who became the first native senator in Canada and when? We welcome your letters to the Buffalo Journal. Please address them to the Buffalo Journal, P.O. Box 1120, Lethbridge, Alberta, T1J484. That's it for today's show. In the coming months, we will be covering more stories on the Aboriginal cultures of Western Canada. So please join us again. Thanks for watching. I'm Lance Telfeathers, and so long.
The Buffalo Journal is a program produced by the Native people of Western Canada. It looks at the culture, history, and contemporary lifestyles of Canada's Aboriginal people.